G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and importantly a fantastic Friday. It's a Friday leading into your weekend. I hope that it is brilliant. So far so good my end on the treatment. I've been unwell, I've been very foggy in my brain, so I do apologise. Something has to give. So it's either going to be doing the videos, posting on the Telegram, or my reading. And at this point in time, it's posting on the Telegram, which is going to absolutely take a back seat at the moment so I can continue hopefully to make videos. You know I'm hurting if I start wearing a t-shirt, but we'll do the best we can. Legends, there's a lot to go over today, of course. We need to have a look at the maps, and what we do need to look at is an area of which we have been saying that there's a pocket developing. It's been developing for a long time. Now it looks like it has been closed up, it's encircled, and there could be, well, Ukrainian pages are reporting that there are Ukrainian soldiers within this encirclement. And if it seems like you're watching a video from a month back when this happened again, or 6 months back when it happened before that, you're not mistaken. Luckily for you, today is the 13th of December. You're not losing your mind, but it does seem this working on the flanks and then the encirclement breakout, it happens again and again, and the commander here has actually been relieved of duty. So of course we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the maps. I want to look at a few weapon systems as well. I want to talk about fibre optics, as there is claims that Ukraine has brought in a fibre optic controlled drone today on the battlefield. I want to see how these are working. I want to talk about India signing a massive oil deal with Russia, and this is a decade long. It's for 10 years. I want to talk about new US aid to Ukraine, and so many people have requested me to talk about this, so I'm going to, and I'm going to right in the beginning, just for you, talk about then this article that has come out that Ukrainian-trained, Turkish-sponsored Syrian rebels to lead assault on Aleppo. Of course, what this is talking about is in Idlib. Course with HTS, and there's other groups that work in and around that, but of course what it is through the hatred of the Assad regime, like they say in this, with then Russian backers as well. Now, some people may call me out for talking about HTS in Idlib, because this is myself in Idlib. I read a very funny comment saying now the Russians will think the Chechens are there, pointing at me. But let's speak on this then. What I will say straight off the bat is HTS is a designated terrorist group. And I'd actually be far less concerned if Ukraine had sent operators to control these drones than actually train these militants themselves. You know, the old give a man to fish versus teach a man to fish. And this is no wonder why Mr. Miller would not answer if Syria now is a terrorist state or not. And we read about this yesterday. It's in a period of transition. What does that mean? Well, I guess we will see. But this leads into something I've spoken about more and more, about where war goes once it reaches a stalemate or a negotiation process, that it can just expand beyond borders. Now, if the hot war ends next month when Trump comes into power, if Trump can do what he says, will the war end? Will the hot war within Ukraine's borders and within Kursk, yes, that may end. But a lot of the times, war just changes to a secondary theatre through proxies. So, for instance, of course, the war in Ukraine is still continuing, and we'll get into that. But you back HTS to fight Assad and Russia, Ukrainian and Russian operators training militants in Africa, and we could go so on and so forth through many, many different countries doing this. I will say this worked so well for us long term when we trained and armed the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. But this is something I've spoken about more and more. And let's go over this from a gentleman who I will have on the podcast soon. We're just trying to figure out a date. Throughout history, whenever a protracted conflict has reached something of an operational stalemate or proved too onerous to maintain, it has frequently been channeled or redirected to secondary theatres in the form of confrontation by proxy. This is somewhat what is happening here, to reduce the power through a third party. And I believe we're going to see so much of this. If both parties' main bodies of military forces are already deployed within the primary zone of peer-to-peer conflict, it can be more cost-effective to employ proxies or surrogates in the more remote peripheral theatres of operations, and gives some times of which this has occurred. And he also goes over that did some of these other wars that we believe ended, has it ended or has it just transitioned? So let's talk about this. And we've talked about this for a good couple of months now, that I have said that we are in the second Cold War and sort of the third World War actually at the same time. Russia and the US, they're engaged, but they're on a leash. With the devastation that nuclear weapons in a hot war would bring to the world, a hot war, in my opinion, is incredibly unlikely. Although I do believe that this century will be the era of the proxy, with the major players being the US, and we can just have the US and the West, China and Russia. They're all engaged themselves against an adversary that is supported by a larger power. And could we see that Taiwan is the next stage after Ukraine? But will Ukraine transition into a secondary theatre if Trump does and can end the war? But what I will say on this is I do think the risk of movement into other theatres, this could influence the Kremlin's willingness to actually negotiate and end this conflict, or the restrictions put on Ukraine at the end of the day. Now, why am I saying the Kremlin's willingness? Well, it is the US who is Ukraine's largest supporter, who is wanting some level of negotiation for the new administration coming in. The Kremlin currently has the upper hand on the battlefield in basically every sector bar a few, but the sectors of which it does are the ones that are really important as far as manpower, shells, drones of some types. You can maybe have subtypes that Ukraine is advancing on, but as far as just overall long-range missile tech, and another one is domestic supply, that it is everything is made domestically to the front line. You're not waiting on other aid. That has been a huge friction point for Kyiv. So I say that it's Russia will be calling some of the shots here at least. People may not like that, but if you're wanting to have a negotiation, well, that is going to be two ways. And if you say who has the upper hand at the moment, it is Russia in the negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. And this is where I bring up the willingness to negotiate or what restrictions may be placed, because history does show us that if your adversary does not surrender or isn't completely exhausted, it is far more likely to spring up in resistance movements internally, or, as we stated above, in proxy insurgency support in other areas of the globe. And this is why a very fast victory can then breed this pop-up, where a very slow grind, the best way to look at this and this exhaustion is against the Third Reich, the Nazis in World War II, this slow grind, completely exhaust, dismantle, and you have small groups popping up, but not like there's some other theatres around where you see pop-up resistance groups. Another good example of that is in France in World War II also. So this may influence, one, how Russia want to negotiate, for we don't want anything but a surrender, or that there are then restrictions put on however this can work. I don't even know how that would look, but could they think, well, if we're going to win, we'll continue to grind? I don't know. But this is exactly why we heard in the first years of the war, we don't hear this much anymore, but this is exactly the reason why we heard Russia must be pushed back, but they must also be strategically defeated. And this was so further resistance didn't arise for a number of years, or some at the time said for 5 decades, 50 years, when people said that Russia was strategically defeated at that point. So this was the reason for this. So it didn't then come back. And that is going to go both ways for the people who are going to be sitting at that table if Trump can get them there. And that is something I'm not sure on. So we'll speak about a little bit more here about Syria. Now, we have footage released here from Syria. I don't know where this originally came from, but this is one of the Russian air bases in Syria. And what we can see here, this is from then of course a drone, is you'll see a number of fighter aircraft. Now, I don't know the exact ins and outs, but there has been some level of deal to maintain the Russian bases here, both the air and maritime bases. Now, there are a few concerns in this because Russia's defeat in Syria isn't Syria-Assad itself. That is a big part of it. That influence, of course, is a big loss to Russia. But the biggest thing is the ability to have air power and naval power in the Mediterranean. And so far, if there has been a deal made, well, that isn't as big as we originally thought it could have been, with Russia fully withdrawing out of that area of the globe. So again, we will see what has been done and what deal comes forward. It's going to take some time. But some of the things you can see in this, you can see Il-76 planes, you can see an amount of then military equipment, but you'll also see in this footage, if I can draw through, both Su-34s, Su-35s and Su-24s as well. And this is something that we spoke about, that strategically the loss of Assad, this and that, especially if Russia was to lose their naval and aviation base in Syria, is a very large strategic loss. But if they are forced to withdraw, where do you think that those planes are going to go? And the cash that was funding everything there, where do you think that is going to go and fight? So this is the thing, strategic and tactical can be ebbs and flows at some points in the globe. And people asked me about, well, what is the effect of these Ukrainian drone operators going to Idlib to train then the HTS forces, rebels, militants, terrorists, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, could these guys be more used to the front line in Ukraine? And I said, well, really, people have said 20. It's not enough to have a huge difference there. So it's not like jeopardising areas in the front line. What's jeopardising areas in the front line is having tens of thousands of guys up in Kursk in an area that seemingly doesn't have any industrial sector. There's a gas exchange there, but we haven't seen that create a huge problem. That's jeopardised more than 20 drone operators. So that hasn't jeopardised any areas of the front line. But it goes back to what I said earlier about the teach a man to fish versus give a man a fish. There can be a problem. We see a rise of drones throughout these groups, which is going to happen at some rate, but this is probably increased at least amongst those fighters, because we have the footage showing this. It's going to be a huge problem in the future because the government changes in Syria, sadly for the civilians there, I don't think has changed. I think we'll see many different changes over our lifetimes. Maybe not mine, but hopefully over yours. And this is something that I believe we're going to see more and more. And this is the interesting bit. Ukraine's intelligence kills a senior Russian missile scientist near Moscow. Mikhail Shatsky, a Russian expert involved in modernising missiles launched against Ukraine, was shot dead near Moscow. His death was likely orchestrated by Ukraine's military intelligence, the GRU, not to be mistaken with the Russian military intelligence, the GRU. Shatsky was a deputy general designer and head of software department of Moscow-based experimental design bureau Mars, and reportedly oversaw the modernisation of the KH-59 and 69. The design bureau Mars, this development and manufactures onboard systems for automated control, navigation, and aircraft and spacecraft. So the first question a lot of people asked me is, well, is this a war crime? Are you allowed to do this? And the thing is, targeting engineers who are designing weapons or planes, it's not inherently illegal, but it depends on some things. And I believe that this guy doesn't fit that category. But again, I'm presenting this to you so you can make up your own mind. The first one is, what is their role? Are they a combatant or are they a civilian? Now, as the Deputy General Designer, in my opinion, civilian here. Whether their actions, in this case, his actions, do they constitute direct participation in hostilities? That is hard to know. What actually was he working on? But again, it doesn't seem that it fits the criteria. I'm not a lawyer. I can get a lawyer on if we want to go across it. Compliance with proportionality and necessity principles. So the proportionality is what was the problem with the bomber that was the bomber pilot that was hit with was it an axe or something? There was a proportionality problem there, as well as the combatant problem at the time. But this is irrelevant to what I want to bring this up for. Legal assessments of such situations are complex and highly case specific. What has been said in this as well is anyone in any way involved in developing, Russia's military-industrial complex and thus supporting Russian aggression against Ukraine is a legitimate target for the Ukrainian Defence Forces. But what I'll say is that this is not in line with the IHL. It's not in line with the international humanitarian law. Anyone developing in the complex, anyone supporting this, it's not in line with a legitimate target. If someone jumps on board, a YouTuber, a blogger, a person working in a factory sweeping the floor, does that fit that developing the complex? Well, the floors need to be cleaned so you can build a plane in there. That doesn't fit the IHL. What I've said is what constitutes any way. And what I've said here is if a Lockheed engineer, if the, the deputy general designer of Lockheed was shot by an adversary, well, how would that be seen? And that is in law. You need to strip away everything as far as a bias and say what is happening here. I can see why the target of this guy and what has developed it. I can get that. But those saying, is it in line with this, at least to my reading, likely not. And the biggest one of this, I actually believe, was against Alexander Dugin. And I actually went down the path of reading 2 of Dugin's books to look at what is said in this. If there has been a hit out that killed his daughter, Daria, what was said in this. And some of it can be extreme, some of it can be whatever. But as far as a target, I don't see that fits any ground under the IHL, especially via proportionality of a car bomb. But this is something else I want to talk about, and this is linking back to proxy. I use this specific case just as a study for what I was talking about in proxies and across borders, that it goes back to this exhaustion and negotiation terms, that you exhausted adversary, what will then occur, but in these negotiated terms, what can be done to, hey, let's stop this and that. Because will we see the FSB, the SVR, the GRU, Russia's intelligence, both domestic, internationally, and military intelligence, will we see them move beyond the arson attacks that we believe that they are committing in Europe to maybe long-term killings? Could we see long-term killings by Russia and or Ukraine then outside of the war, and what can be done in maybe negotiated terms, maybe to stop that? Because I believe it would be in the US interest, especially Trump coming in, would want to stop something like this. And of course, this goes back into the idea that if you exhaust your enemy absolutely completely, you have less of a risk of that then popping up. And that is what I believe Ukraine wanted to do to Russia through not only sanctions but military action, push back to the border, but exhaust that, so less of that. They don't have the capability to do that, but I believe Russia's trying to do the other way too. And this all is one. What's his name? I've got his book somewhere. Karl von Clausewitz talks about war in that way, that it is like tiny little piece going on of someone fighting here with a sword, but you zoom out and out and out, and this is all interconnected, even if it doesn't seem so. But will this ever be enforced, either on the Russian war crimes that are committed or the Ukrainian war crimes that have been committed across targeting or drones or executions or whatever? And no, none of this, in my opinion, will ever be enforced. It probably will see to who wins per se. But no, I don't believe any of it will be enforced. Look at the H guys' pages that explode. This is a clear and grave violation of proportionality, of targeting, and you don't know if a kid was holding that in their hand at the time. Was anything beyond maybe some headlines made about that realistically? No, not really. But this is where I'm saying that because there's no restrictions on anything, really, we will see a rise of the continuation of wars, even if the hot war then ends, I believe, unless there's a complete exhaustion. So it's going to be very difficult, and that, I think, will go into the way that Ukrainian commanders and Russian commanders and official statesmen are going to see where they want to end the war, to really exhaust the other side. Maybe economically for Russia, what will lead to a military exhaustion that Ukraine can push back, or a military exhaustion onto Ukraine. Again, this is all pieces in a very, very large puzzle that is well beyond the borders of the states that we are looking at here. Now, many will vehemently disagree with this assessment, but I believe that Russia and China, that more so Russia, believe that they will rise to a higher power at some point in the next coming decades or century, but it won't be through rising to that level. It will actually be through the West having a large reduction in power, therefore they will end up with more power globally. And the way I believe that they see this is through the West's obsession with progressive liberalism, and that they see that this leads to reduced competence, reduced industrial output through potentially, say, something like a DEI target, reduced global influence through reduction of traditional values, maybe religiosity, maybe traditional family, or nuclear family, what ties in, I guess, with the traditional values, that itself, that they're winning the battle of time. They go, well, in 50 years, in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, we may just end up more powerful around the world. But I have a marker for this, and currently I don't believe that we are that close, regardless of what maybe Mr. Shapiro may say on the TV. But of course, things can move very quickly. It goes back to my bankruptcy theory. What the marker is once asylum seekers, whether they're legitimate asylum seekers for protection or economic refugees, but once these start seeking asylum en masse outside countries of the West, especially the US, that would be my marker to say we're in huge trouble. That if someone leaving this country goes, no, I'd rather go to X country outside of the West or outside of America, that is the marker. Now, I believe we are a long way from that, but are we crawling towards it? And could we crawl off a cliff and fall very quickly? There is potential for that. And many, many people do speak about what's his name, Gad Said, whatever his name is, about the how much effect that ideology can have if you lose your ability to critically think. And I often say, no one in the world militarily is going to ever defeat the West. It will be internal. And I believe the West's biggest threat is the inability for many to think critically, even tertiary level educated students and professors. It is the largest threat to the West, and no one is seeking to go, holy shit, what is going on here? They'd rather blame outside influences. But that's my 2 cents. I went way off where we needed to go there. The whole point is, could this war stop here, cross borders, and continue on intelligence targeted operations? Absolutely, it could. Now, shut up, Willie. Show us some things going bang. Okay, then I will. As you have known, I've been a little bit obsessed with fibre optic controlled drones because I see these, as a former infantryman, I see these as incredibly, incredibly deadly on the front line. And it seems like every single day we have more and more footage from the Russian forces showing Ukrainian vehicles getting destroyed by these fibre optic controlled drones. There's no way EW can pick it. And we're getting more and more footage showing how far now these can travel. And I've said as well, yes, electronic warfare, this completely is immune to this. But what I have said months ago when there was talk about these first coming into the battlefield was in areas where there is massive underground complexes. Odessa has huge underground complexes. So did Avdiivka, so did Mariupol, all these sectors. But they had to be cleared basically by a guy on a gun. But what I had said, and I've said that these are non-radio signals. These could go through those areas too. And what we're seeing here is you can see, because all of these tend to have the same format of where the frames per second is, where the battery is to tell if it is a fibre optic or not. This is a Russian fibre optic here. Then in this shed, this storage shed, targeting a Ukrainian soldier here who is then shooting at that drone. And we could see these used more and more underground in areas, in built-up areas where radio signals could be either lost by the environment or lost by electronic warfare. I think we'll see more and more of that, and these do have impressive range of what we've seen. Now, I think it is imperative that Ukraine develop, or a country or company providing aid to Ukraine develop as fast as possible the Ukrainian fibre optically controlled drone. Now, this has been shared far and wide by many different pages today. Now, some say claimed, others are just saying that it is, that this is a Ukrainian fibre optic drone taking out a Russian vehicle here, as we see turned. Now, what I will say is there's nothing in this that it might be, but it's just like, what is that based on? It's a vehicle going bang here, and obviously, a massive destruction, but this doesn't mean that it's a fibre optic drone. There's no evidence in this that is what it is. Maybe it was a North Korean fibre optic drone, but again, I think it is imperative that occurs. What people have pointed out, I've seen even guys in Ukrainian page going, this is old footage, there's no snow on the ground like we see in other footage. Could be, I don't know, but I do believe that we will see Ukrainian fibre optic controlled drones being used at some point. I think that needs to happen. There's some larger ones we've seen in testing, but from the amount of vehicles I'm seeing destroyed by the Russian fibre optics, I think it is absolutely top of the line to get fibre optic drones into the Ukrainian forces, more so than maybe we need this long range strike capability, because tactical, strategic, but you need absolutely a mixture of both. And currently, tactically, Ukraine is stepping back and back, like I'm about to show you on the maps. I was actually going to do the maps first. What we see here, though, is these are actually now 2 Russian fibre optic controlled drones in tandem, in tag team, targeting a Ukrainian Abrams tank here, of course, come across from the US. You can see the hit up here as these have been lined up. There is some GTA music. I can't do it. I'll get copyright struck. But we see here, and then the final one comes in and then strikes the tank right under where, that's a pretty solid hit on that, to be fair, between the turret and the hull of the vehicle. So again, it's important things to know new weapons or weapon systems that are being used in a different way coming into the battlefield. So let's have a look at the maps, and I have a few things to show. So of course here is Ukraine, the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv, the red area, occupied since 22, purple since 2014. So let's zoom in on what is moving. Now there's no changes up in Kursk, but we are expecting some changes at some point, one way or another. So this is the area we need to talk about. I call this the Ilinikia front. Of course, Ilinikia is right back here, but you could call it the Kurakhove front. You can call it whatever you would like. But what you can see in here is that there is a strategic encirclement, potentially physical encirclement, now occurring, that the grey zone has come right across. This is an incredibly dangerous situation that tends to happen again and again and again, with only 1.7 kilometres between the two actual, on the Ukrainian map where the Russians actually are, but grey zone the whole way through. So let's have a look at what some Ukrainian pages have specifically said about this. So this one says a group of soldiers found themselves in operational encirclement in Hanivka, area of Kurakhove. There is a few hours to rescue them. The commander of the Donetsk OTU, General Lutsenko, was removed from his post. So let's expand on what has been said here through Deep State. The situation, what they're calling the Uspenivkia bag. So the Uspenivkia right here in this bag, in this encirclement pocket that is forming. Not very encouraging. The situation is getting worse. It's worth highlighting several key places in the bag of these areas. They're located with it. The enemy is trying to break through without ceasing, literally from all sides, as well as Trodove. So this is Trodove up in here, which play a main role in holding this bag from Dalnay, Trodove. The Russians climb into Uspenivka where the bag closes. So they're trying to get into here, Uspenivka, and close this, keeping then the forces in here. Now this should all definitely be grey zone at the moment. The enemy has been repeatedly spotted in Uspenivka and is actively trying to storm it, gain a foothold for further advancement and take over the village completely. Defence forces are trying to clear the buildings from the enemy, but this is not fully achieved. The number of infantry is only growing, so Russia's pushing more and more in. According to the information we know, the enemy has the ability to carry out manoeuvres between Uspenivka and Hanivka. So Uspenivka, Hanivka right here, which actually cut off the grouping of the Ukrainian units in the bag. There is no confirmation the enemy was able to gain a foothold there, so the area of the map has only become grey zone. The Ukrainian military is actively working on stabilisation, so there is possibly the enemy will not be allowed to gain a foothold there, but time will tell. So will we see Ukraine be able to break out? Will we see Russia be able to close then the encirclement? Again, we will see. But again, like I said in the beginning, we see this again and again. And I know very many people are getting very frustrated with seeing the same thing happening. You should see my signal chat at the moment. It is difficult to understand the meaning of holding the Uspanivka bag where the enemy continues to gradually capture Kurakhove. The current situation is a result of inaction or not entirely clear activities of the Donetsk OTU. The enemy is occupying more and more territory toward Uspanivka, risking to close the ring and leave defence forces in Hanivka, Uspanivka, Trudove, Vasiligay and Romanivka. The situation is critical for everyone except for Lutsenko, the former commander of the Donetsk OTU. According to our information, he has been removed from his post and will serve sentencing by holding a position in the command of the ground forces. And soon everyone will hear from the next OTU commander that they have been retired to prepared positions. Again, what we hear is, no, the withdrawal has been made tactically, strategically back to previously prepared position. This is exactly what we heard all the way back here in Avdiivka. Let's have a look. Avdiivka is now 50 kilometres behind the line, falling back to prepared positions around Tonenki or Lvivkia, then around Umansky, around Kalivkia, and then has stepped back and back. I do worry, are there any fortified positions that he's actually fallen back to? Well, much, much more importantly, Kurakhove is getting stormed. There's a lot of soldiers, Ukrainians, held down in here that could have helped in here because this was, in my opinion, always going to close up. And many, many soldiers are saying things to the effect of, we always withdraw too late, and because of a late withdrawal, it jeopardizes other more important areas. So then let's look at Suryak here. Now, Suryak actually paints a similar-ish picture, but it does show that Ukrainian army recaptured this Konstantinopolsky and expelled Russian army to the southern outskirts of the locality. So he is painting nowhere near as grim of a picture, although this area has never shown as ever under Russian control. But could that open up for a way out of the soldiers there? We will see. I have spoken to other military analysts, but not public ones like me, who have said the biggest risk for both Ukraine and Russia is that something somewhere gets cut off and there's such a large amount of forces there that just everything else then falls. Now, this is not that, I do not believe, but he has said, well, he was actually referring to when I spoke to him about Russia, he said the biggest way Ukraine can have a big victory in this tactically is that they are able to cut off a huge amount of Russian forces, and like that, or over a 24-hour period, they level the manpower issue. Is that realistic? I don't know. I probably don't believe so. It seems like Russia is methodically flanks, secure, flower, bloom. But could it happen? Well, we don't know what's going to happen. No one has a crystal ball except for bloggers, I guess. They have a crystal ball. They know exactly what's going to happen. But let's talk just north of here. So we have Kurakhove. So Kurakhove would just sit where this 122 is on this map here, but further movements out from Stary Turny to Sontanivskia, where we see red on this map, and Zhoroya is, of course, this red dot. This will close up as well to the north, and that makes a whole problem for not only the pocket here, but the larger pocket between Sontanivka and Sukiyali that is getting developed. Furthermore, we come just up, and this is Pushkene. This is that red dot here that has come under control as well. If we take where this road has this then like kink in it, right here, he's saying that this area, where all this grey zone here has been then closed up as well. But we're in the Pokrovsk direction. We can see a little bit of red check made outwards from Pokrovsk, or outwards on the Pokrovsk direction. As I spoke about yesterday, I believe that Udashny is the goal in here, to get this train line, get this road under control, and then that is going to limit the amount of flow into Pokrovsk. But there is a larger problem that is occurring in Pokrovsk right now, and we have spoken about this. There are some major mines that sit around Pokrovsk. So there is one right here. There is then this, or there's a couple of others sit, but this one here, I believe, is the major one. It's one of the biggest in Ukraine, at least, of course, for coking coal. There are, you can see up here, there's other ones as well. You can just spot these like piles of spoil, but one of these has been shut down. So this, firstly, is off the Kyiv Independent, speaking about the situation in Pokrovsk. We have to make a non-stand decision to increase resilience of defence and more effectively destroy the occupiers. The battles are the battles are of an exceptionally tough nature. They've gained ground in Pokrovsk. and 2 positions were destroyed and 1 was lost. These positions are Ukrainian positions. There are measures being taken to bring this back. Kursk has spoken about the disadvantages here, especially in manpower, which no one likes to talk about because people would ask, it will go to the front line. And they're throwing all available forces forward, the Russians are, to try and get a foothold. Russian pages are saying that some recon elements have reached the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Again, take that with a grain of salt, unless we see footage of this. Kursk on November 29th has ordered additional reserves and weapons to try and hold Pokrovsk, slow down or stall Russia's offensive into here. But this came out as well a little bit later on. Now, what I will say, this ad here, if you're ever doing any deep diving, tech diving, gas mix diving, brand Poseidon, that is the way to go. I can't dive due to my head. If you're ever looking for equipment, that's the way. Metinvest, Ukraine's largest steel producer, has suspended operations at the Pshani coal plant near the frontline town of Pokrovsk. Now, I believe it is this one, but I could be incorrect. Others have said it is this one or this one here. Regardless, it has the same effect. The closure comes amid increasingly dangerous Russian advances towards Pokrovsk, a key Ukrainian logistics hub. Ukraine has lost positions near the town, advancing Russian troops over the past day. Remember, it's not going to be strategically important. Metinvest said it was closing the Pokrovsk site, which includes a mine and administrative building. Core personnel have been evacuated with their families. This is the largest coking coal producer in Ukraine. It's a major blow to Ukraine's steel production industry. The closure of the plant will diminish Ukrainian steel production to 2 to 3 million metric tons from a projected 7.5 million tons by the end of 2024. You can see how important this is. Metinvest, they lost the infamous Azovstal plant in the early days, so that's a huge hit there. Of course, you'll be familiar with this one, as well as other areas that are incredibly important, but steel production is one of Ukraine's leading industries, the second largest source of foreign currency after agriculture. One of the problems is you can see the amount of agricultural land that has come under Russian occupation, and that 11 or 17 trillion dollars that the US has spoken about of resource that Russia is currently sitting on top of. Let's move a little bit further towards Bakhmut, Chasiv Yar. We have another update in here, and just a small bit more ground made in the refactory plant inside Chasiv Yar, right around in this direction again. The maps don't line up, just wait for it. There was a slight grey zone shift, I believe it's here in Rivnepil. No? Oh yeah, there is. There's a slight grey zone shift there, so maybe hang on to see if there has maybe some red tomorrow. That's worth noting. So let's talk about US aid and Russia and India. Firstly, we'll talk about US aid. United States announces significantly military assistance to Ukraine. So they're talking in and around the $500 million mark. Of course, HIMARS 155 artillery shells, HARMS, these are incredibly important to take out things like air defense, and JAV AT4. One thing I was thinking the other day, I was actually thinking in the showers, the NLAW was like the biggest thing in the early days of the war, same as like the Bayraktar. I wonder whatever happened to the NLAW. I wonder if it's just, well, drones were more efficient to take out tanks, longer range, cheaper, whatever. Or maybe there's a shortage from Saab, make the NLAW. Also the shittest cars ever, but maybe there's that. Or I might do some digging and have a look, but this is important too. Rosneft, Reliance, agree biggest ever India-Russian oil supply deal of 500,000 barrels a day of crude oil. Biggest ever deal between Russia and India. 10-year agreement now amounts to 0.5 of global supplies, worth roughly $13 billion a year at today's prices. So with inflation in, it's going to be significant. You can't just go, it's $130 billion. No. With inflation, you're going to be like at $200 billion. It would further cement energy relations between India and Russia, which is under heavy Western sanctions over its invasion of Ukraine. Remember, the oil you're pumping in your car in a lot of Europe is still Russian oil, but it's crude that went to India. India refines it, and then it goes to Europe because there's sanctions on refined products, not the crude. It's a fucking scam, to be fair. Every time I see, new sanctions are put against Russia, I'm like, how is it 3 years and you're still adding sanctions? Why didn't you just do all the sanctions at the beginning and not have these issues now? Anyway, further on, it goes, India has no sanctions on Russian oils, so refineries there have cashed in on the cheaper crude supply. Sanctions have made Russian oil cheaper than their rival grades by at least $3 to $4 per barrel. What's in Indonesia, same thing. Indonesia doesn't have sanctions against Russian oil, but because Russian oil crude has dropped due to sanctions, India is getting a good deal. So Indonesia is getting a good deal, and India will be getting a good deal. I wonder how this will look. I wonder what's in the back end of that deal if and when these sanctions get lifted and it goes to an original price. Maybe it's sold at a guarantee lower price. Again, we'll see. Oil, gas, resources everywhere is all mixed up with this, and it's also mixed up with what is occurring in Syria to a degree as well. Legends, have a fantastic day. 40 minutes. Too long. I'm going to go sit down on the couch and maybe edit later. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.